Welcome everyone to the third of 4 Angel Education sessions this year. This is Maximizing Returns, and it builds on the anatomy of a great startup, which we did last month. We're going to provide about 20 minutes up front of context for the 2 panels. We'll have 6 individuals, 5 entrepreneurs, and an investment banker provide some perspective on their experience with growing companies, maximizing returns, and getting to exit. We will then do our customary door prize for those of you who are still here, a model of Angel's Envy. And feel free to stick around. I think the bar is going to be open until about 8:30. So diving in, we'd like to make sure everyone does 2 things here. One is to note our last Angel Education session of the year, which is December 4th at Tinkham Center. This is where we're going to bring it all together. It'll be very different than tonight. Instead of me talking and us having panels, we're going to have 30 to 40 entrepreneurs and investors sharing 60 to 90 second best practices, things you need to know, really fast-paced. I've talked to some people already who have some great ideas, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. So that's number 1. Number 2 is just wanted to ask everyone to join me in thanking and acknowledging PNC for their generous sponsorship of our Angel Education session this year. This is not something that's easy to do or inexpensive to do, and PNC's commitment allows us to put on 4 of these sessions each year, to have several hundred individuals come through, and believe it or not, to have hundreds and hundreds of YouTube views of this content. So we're very hopeful that these education sessions will provide more data points, more muscle memory for us as investors, for our entrepreneurs, and ultimately help us be more successful. I want to take a moment and let Pat O'Brien say hello and a brief word about what they're doing at PNC.
Thank you, Todd. Good evening. I'm Pat O'Brien, Senior Vice President with PNC Wealth Management. We're proud to be here to sponsor another installment of North Coast Angel Fund education series. It's important to us to support the community. We do a lot in the neighborhoods as far as arts and culture, but we recognize the importance of actually sponsoring and working with entrepreneurs and organizations like North Coast. So it's critical to the success of our region. Thank you to Todd and the team. We appreciate the support, and we look forward to continue supporting these important dialogues. So my peers and I spend most of our time working with business owners. We work directly with them, trying to assist them in deploying their strategic visions and advising them both on their personal planning as well as their personal balance sheets. We're excited that this evening you're going to have one of our peers on the panels, Bill Watkins. I've known Bill for many years. He, in his role, his investment banking role with Harris Williams, has traveled across the entire PNC footprint. So he certainly has quite a bit to add from a viewpoint perspective and insights as far as what's happening out in the external world on an M&A side. With over 55,000 employees, the breadth, depth, and dimension that we bring to our clients' doorsteps is unparalleled. You'll see, I think some of you have actually grabbed some of the content when you walk through the door, but we spend a lot of time from an education and content perspective making sure that we are bringing that thought process, again, to our clients' doorsteps, promoting different thought processes that are more proactive than reactive. So, if you didn't get the content, I do believe that it's actually out at the front table, so on your way out, feel free to grab some. Okay? So again, thank you very much for this evening. We appreciate this opportunity. Again, we hope you enjoy it, and we hope the dialogue is meaningful. Thank you.
Terrific. And just as a little bit more on the content that Pat's referring to, there are basically 3 pieces on exits and exit strategies. That is something near and dear to our hearts. So I've read them, and I would encourage everyone to do so as well. We'd also like to acknowledge our Innovation Council members. These are 20 Northeast Ohio organizations and institutions that have supported North Coast. Oftentimes, events like this, sending representatives from their innovation group, from their community group, from the business itself to attempt to collaborate on innovation, to learn from our startups, and to add value by way of voice of customer, industry expertise, and potential connections. It's a very valuable program and one that we hope to continue to grow. So, maximizing returns. It's not as easy as it sounds, and it doesn't even sound that easy. But stay with us. We're going to provide some high-level context, and then we're going to allow our panelists to disagree and push back on anything here that they like. So the reasons that we do this are that startups are risky. This is a funnel we show at every angel education session, just to acknowledge that at least half of the companies we invest in will fail. And when there's a failure, we're going to lose all of our investment. The reason why we attempt to maximize our returns is on the winners, we better really win, right? We better reduce the damage from these losses and do everything we can to drive meaningful returns from our winners, and that's part of what we'll talk about. So we made 55 investments over the past 12 years, and generally entrepreneurs after a year find themselves in one of three worlds. One world is not a lot of fun, right? You are drowning. There's not a lot of money left. Revenue isn't what you hoped it was. Product is behind. It's time for a pivot. Things are challenging. There's that group that's floating, right? They're still alive. Kind of looks relaxing if you try to put yourself in her mind, but they're not really going anywhere, right? And over years, that is a really difficult position for an entrepreneur to be in and for angel investors to be in. And then there are those companies that are flying, right, where things are going faster, are more stressful, there's more tension on all the pieces of the business because all of the shortcomings of a startup come out at high growth. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit here. The drownings are hard to avoid. If there's a big miss on product market fit, if the team isn't up for the challenge, if something has changed in the marketplace, that's something that's challenging to fix. Our hope is that we'll continue to get better at helping those companies in the other two categories. So what levers drive returns and what levers allow us to maximize value? So this is a amazingly oversimplified equation, but essentially where we start times the new things that we get drive a certain amount of results and permits a transaction. So a level deeper, the starting point is the market need. Is there really a burning need, a pain point, an opportunity in the market? Is that market large enough, TAM, total addressable market, to justify venture path investing? Is the product that the team has developed adequate? Does it solve the problem? Is the team up for the challenge? And then lastly, the deal terms, right? Deal terms for us as angel investors matter. It's not the only thing, not necessarily the most important thing, but if an investor is going to put in $100,000, it is significant whether that means they own 1% of the company or 10% of the company. And it's hard to make up for being in a deal with bad deal terms up front. New resources, so the dollars allow you to add to your team, to bring more resources and more technologies. By technologies, we mean if you're selling things, marketing automation to market, CRM to drive the sales, sales enablement platforms to help create more efficiency. And then, of course, once you have customers, you'll need more technology to manage, support, and deliver products. Oftentimes, there are partnerships, channel partnerships, market partnerships, and lastly, pivots. For most of our companies, even the most successful, there's a meaningful change to the strategy, a meaningful change to how they go to market within a year or two. So the results, which often is called traction, is usually pretty straightforward. This list is really focusing on what we do in our sweet spot. So this is not medical companies that are in development and going through FDA. This is not benchtop science. What we're looking at here is products that are being sold. Revenue is our measuring stick, typically, and oftentimes there's a multiple of revenue applied at that next. Financing, revenue quality. So is it recurring revenue or one-time revenue? Is it high margin or is it only modest margin? Is there additional value that we see in that revenue because it drives strategic value, because it has service pieces on top of it? And then lastly here, the growth rate in the intangibles. So To state the obvious again, a company that's at $2 million in revenue after 2 years is probably going to have a higher valuation than a company that's at $2 million in revenue after 5 years or 6 years. That ramp rate is a big deal. And then there are, of course, the intangibles, right? Is there strategic impact to our customers? Is there IP that allows us to build a moat? Is there a network effect which allows us to grow and scale with increased efficiency? And then lastly, a transaction. Sometimes an exit, sometimes the deal terms will simply mean the capital that comes in and flows to us as investors in the waterfall. But most times, the whole cycle starts again with the next financing. Most of our companies are going to raise more than one round. In some cases, that's 2 rounds. In some cases, that is 5 rounds or 6 rounds. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we're talking about maximizing returns, we can get hurt at any step of the way. So it is important in deal structuring and making sure we have the ability to follow on rounds in the future, for us to participate in deals, for us to have some protective provisions where we have a seat at the table, ideally some visibility into what companies are doing, so that we can stay engaged and increase the likelihood that we do in fact maximize returns and provide returns to our investors. So most of this so far is talking about individual investments. In reality, at North Coast and other funds, we're looking at maximizing returns across the portfolio, which is a little bit different. Those of you here who are members of the fund will find this to be very familiar. These are the 55 investments that we've made. On the right are companies that are no longer actively operating, either because they were successful and exited or because they were unsuccessful and ceased operations. And in the main area here of the matrix, some of those companies are doing exceedingly well, others are on death's doorstep. And it's up to us to try to come up with a strategy to optimize those returns. This is something we shared a couple months ago, and we've de-identified it here. These are our 55 investments. The farther a deal is to the right, the closer it is to our core thesis, which is B2B software as a service, selling to businesses that have a buyer, that have revenue, and something we think is scalable. So on thesis to the right, off thesis to the left. Higher they are, the better they did. Lower they are, the worse that they did. And not surprisingly, we do a lot better when we're on thesis. So for us, maximizing returns from this point forward is staying disciplined, is being candid with ourselves about what we do well, where we've seen success in the past, and where we think we can reasonably be successful in the future. It's easy to fall in love with an opportunity, to really like a team and a person, but for a wide variety of reasons, many of these opportunities just are not going to be successful. And if we don't look back to see what our experience has been, we're probably going to make the same mistakes again. So this is the thesis I mentioned before. This is what drives everything we do. We would encourage individual investors who are not part of a fund like ours to have a thesis, to actually have something that they write down and articulate, which looks forward and says, these are the kinds of deals I'm going to get excited about. These are the kinds of entrepreneurs I want to meet. These are the types of companies in terms of industry, in terms of stage, so that there can just be a more disciplined approach to the type of investing that we all do. For us, optimizing our membership is a big part of how we try to maximize returns. Those of you in the membership have heard this. We now have 3 committees, an ambassador committee, a portfolio support committee, then a group that's looking at the investment screening and diligence process. For us, we've learned that our members have a great deal of value, and we want to attract members that have additional value as well, for us to have industry expertise, functional expertise, and introductions to companies to add value. This is very much a work in progress. It's going to change, but again, we think is one of the resources of the region that doors tend to be open if we ask and if you all ask as entrepreneurs. So by involving our Innovation Council members, by involving other corporates and institutions in the city, we think we can have more input and more likelihood to be successful. So 4 steps here to maximize returns before we bring the panel up. 4 easy steps. One is just recognize the signals of a good opportunity. For us, that's how big of a market is it? Is this an interesting product and team? Is there a product that we think is viable in the long term? All those core pieces. Second, support those great companies and teams. You have to make investments to have a return. In our region, we are certainly undercapitalized. We'd love to have more funds like ourselves, more individual investors, more seed stage VCs and Series A VCs. We definitely need more investment. We need to add value wherever possible and get out of the way when we're not adding value. And lastly, you need to get lucky in this particular business. The luck can be the difference between surviving and not surviving, or sometimes between a 5X and a 10X. That luck can be market timing, it can be meeting the right person, having the right strategic partner, but unless you make the right bets and you try to support them, it's unlikely to be in a position to get lucky. So lastly, we hope that this whole activity will cause us to lose less, to win more, and to win bigger. And as simple as that sounds, I think it's actually something that can be operationalized and something that is doable. And we're going to invite the panelists up, our first panel here first, to help set this straight, to talk about what they've learned in their entrepreneurship journeys and their angel investing journeys to help us maximize returns. I'm excited for the conversation. Before we dive in, we're just going to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and the companies. Then we'll have questions from me, and then we'll have questions from the audience in each of the panels.
Okay, hello. My name is Nancy Diller-Shively. The company I founded was Cambridge Home Healthcare. It is still in business. And the other company was called Bridgeport Home Healthcare. Cambridge Home Healthcare was a Ohio-based company. It started as a small acquisition that I made after being an RN who was promoted through the ranks to become COO of a company out of Basking Ridge, New Jersey that was publicly traded. So I had some background in the business before venturing out on my own. However, I started way in the float position for a very long period of time, moved into the sink position, moved into the float position, and finally was able to fly. But it did not come easy. My company was it started as a small acquisition, and we did a lot for Medicare patients as well as private pay patients. I had two different divisions, and the company was hit with a lot of different things due to all the regulations and whatnot that go with government-funded programs. So after X number of trials and tribulations, I was able to grow the company to a position where I took on some venture capitalists. I had a two-stage exit for my company. I took on some venture capitalists out of Dallas, Texas, and I took out a pretty significant amount of capital at that point, but worked with those partners to grow the company again to another level. And when I exited in 2011, the company was doing about $45 million in revenue throughout the state of Ohio and a couple offices we had in Pennsylvania. So it was quite a ride. I know I'm limited on time, so we can't get into any of the details, but my hope is that my experience will be helpful in assisting entrepreneurs in their endeavors, and hopefully some of my experiences will prove beneficial to those that are also looking to fly someday.
Thank you, Nancy. That's a great story. My name is Kevin Von Kaiserlin. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Keyfactor. Keyfactor is a cyber security software company headquartered in Independence, just 15 minutes up the street from here. The software company that we founded specializes in managing cryptographic keys for large enterprise Global 2000 companies. We got pretty lucky as we were originally founded as a consulting company working on identity and access management. And I went through all the phases that Nancy described, and Todd articulated that we were definitely in the drowning mode. We found a floating mode, and then we got a method to fly. But as we took the company and transitioned it from a consulting company to a software company, we experienced all those pieces of the journey. Some of it very painful when you have to come home and tell your wife you've got to write a check to cover payroll. And then some of it more exciting when you build this magical thing called recurring revenue. I didn't realize how powerful that was until a few years ago. But, that's really my introduction, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I think that's better. Awesome. So my name is Brad Owen. Todd, thanks for Thanks for having me here tonight, and Daniel as well, and whoever else was involved in this decision. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've worked on a lot of different products and companies over the years. Fortunate enough to bring the last 4 companies we worked on from startup to exit. I'm currently the CEO of a company called NeverBounce. We're an email verification platform and data cleaning company. We started this company about 5 years ago, and we were recently acquired by ZoomInfo earlier this year. So I'm a Cleveland native, and over the last couple of years, I've transitioned more into investing in companies that I believe in, and companies, like people, and that I think hold that sort of unrealistic and crazy sense of conviction for their companies. So that's really what I look for in terms of angel investment, but I really am more focused publicly in building companies and bringing them to market. So.
Great. Well, Brad, we'll start with you and continue the theme of conviction there. So you were almost incubating multiple companies. You started and sold companies. You had something like an agency model where there was some services work. What caused you to bet the farm on NeverBounce?
Yeah, so I was running an agency here in Cleveland. The agency had a really interesting model. We spent about 60% of our time on client work. And the client work that we were doing was mostly B2B SaaS. So we were working on SaaS platforms before SaaS was, I think, really a term, and also loved recurring revenue. Unfortunately, we were watching our clients make recurring revenue. And while that was a really wonderful experience for us, I think I really wanted to make some of that recurring revenue myself. So we started to build these companies internally, sort of like an incubator, and spread our time across our own internal products. So, in that process, NeverBounce essentially, this particular company was built out of that. So some of the other companies we were bringing to market, but I think what we realized was that we were spreading ourselves pretty thin by not focusing on one thing, which I think is a struggle for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think once you realize that it sounds so cliche, but once you realize that you actually just have to focus on one thing, and believe it and live it and breathe it, it was kind of like the rest was history. So this particular company, I think the conviction was formed by simply that we had sort of a product market fit, we had an MVP for it, then we just, let it ride. So, yeah.
Great. So Nancy, we'll go to you. As far as I know, there was no IP, no patents, no technology. You basically won through great execution. Can you tell us more?
That's a really good question. There's so many things that are similar in all businesses and so many things that are different. In home health care, you have no shoe to return if it doesn't fit right or things like that. It's your product are your people. So for me, how do I maximize efficiencies when I'm dealing with people? It was quite the dilemma and something that really took some focus and concentration on how do I make this company different? How do I set Cambridge Home Healthcare apart from every other home care company that's out there? And it all boiled down to quality. That was, if you had to say what is your patent, the patent would be having the best possible quality you could have in how your staff delivers care to the patients. Our patients are in their individual homes. So first and foremost, you have to hire people that you can trust. That's easier said than done. So we did whatever we could in terms of fingerprinting, background checks. Back in the day when I started the company, there was no social media. Kind of envious because I would have been on everybody's Facebook and looking to see what I could find out about the individual before I would hire them and send them into an elderly person's home. So we really worked hard. We did our own internal monitoring. We did secret shopping of our branches. We would show up unannounced to do supervisory visits. We spent a lot of time storyboarding and thinking about how can we be positive that what we're doing in terms of quality would set us apart from our competitors, and it worked.
Great. So Kevin, on Key Factor, you were in the security industry, which is a tough space. It's hard to make and deliver those products, and it's difficult to sell into enterprises in that space. So why did Key Factor win?
Well, I think we were sitting at a unique juncture in the company where we were every day outside consulting, working with these large global 2,000 clients and working on a problem of helping them essentially figure out, how do I authenticate? How do I know that you are who you claim to be? How do I encrypt the traffic that's going across the network and protect the secrets of the company? And now, how do I authorize a transaction? So we were helping them through consulting projects deploy a technology called public key infrastructure, PKI. And after we'd helped them architect, design, and deploy it, they'd come back to us about a year later and say, do you happen to have any software to help us manage this? And so we thought about that. I thought, well, maybe we could build some software to help them manage this infrastructure, because it's kind of complex. And could we make a software product that made it simple and easy to do at large scale? So from the juncture that we were sitting at, we saw the opportunity to build a software platform. So we bootstrapped it. We took consultants that were on the bench, put them together and helped write some code and some software, and then went out and we sold it half a dozen times and figured we knew what we were doing. So we started to invest more resources into the software platform to build it out. And we got lucky. We were at the right place at the right time in the market, and that really helped us.
And Brad, for Neverbounce, what was that key moment where you saw an inflection point where you knew you had to double down, and this was the key moment?
For sale, for acquisition, is that right?
Really more so in growth, so understanding that this company has legs.
Gotcha. I hate to say that unrealistically, I thought that before the company was ever started, which I think is probably one of those key points, kind of, have that conviction before you build the company. So we were telling people, I think, early on that we were like, our exit strategy was like, kind of predefined before the product was built. So the inflection point, our growth inflection point was probably when we hit 100,000 customers. And I kind of remember driving home that night and just saying, wow, 100,000 people, that's pretty crazy. And so that was sort of one of those moments for me. But I think in terms of like knowing that it would work, it sounds somewhere between crazy conviction, pretentious. I don't know where it sits, but I think we really thought it was going to work from day one, and I'm not sure it would have if we didn't think that.
And Nancy, just to riff on that for a minute, you obviously had confidence in your business, but then you went out and convinced a bunch of venture capitalists to write you a check as well. What did it take to get them over the hump?
Well, that's not exactly how it went. They approached me. So at the time, home healthcare has been a really fast growth business for several decades now, and I would be getting phone calls off and on, throughout the whole time I owned the company. Would you like to sell? Tell us about your business, so on and so forth. I wasn't actually looking to sell when they reached out to me, but it had gotten to the point where my children weren't interested in taking over the business. I wasn't quite at the retirement age yet, but I thought maybe I'll think about this. And a particular group reached out to me. I told them I wasn't ready. They were very persistent, and that's why I had a two-stage exit. I wasn't quite ready to go yet, but I was thinking about it, so I did accept an offer from them for part of my stock, and I have since now invested several times with their other ventures that they're involved in, but it did give me an opportunity then to kind of ease out of it. This was my third child, and I'm sure many of you will say that about your businesses. It was something that I started from scratch, and by the time I was at that point, it was an emotional decision, but I have never looked back either, so.
So Kevin, once you got to scale and you were thinking about how do you maximize value, how did you assess the trade-offs between where to put dollars to grow the company, when to invest in product, when to invest in people, when to invest in sales and marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were definitely a number of junctures where you come up against that decision. Our first one was, as a consulting company, recognizing how the company was going to be valued, that we were going to trade at a multiple of about 0.8 to 1 times revenue. So it wasn't a huge multiple that we could move at, but yet I had all the angel investors that had bought into and invested in this consulting company that I inherited. And when we started to look at how could we build an exit strategy for the folks, we recognized that we would have to change and build a recurring revenue model, and we need to move the multiple up to get something that was more attractive to create a better exit for the people that had invested in the company early on. And when we went out, we started looking at, and I was pitching this story, we were 90% consulting revenue and about 10% perpetual license at the time. And I couldn't get any investors at all. So it was a sad story for me for a while. That was that drowning phase. But then as we put more, we recognized that we were really onto something with the software. And so we made a decision to take some of our top billing consultants and assign them to the software team and make them architects in software. And it signaled across the entire company that we were deadly serious about building a software company. Because we were giving up billable revenue and consulting dollars on a bet for what these architects could build on our software product down the road. But having done that, then we went out and did our first series, what I call our Series A, brought in our first venture capital group, Plymouth Ventures, out of Michigan. We had a story around the ARR that was growing and building, and it became much easier to start to make the trade-offs and align resources around the software business versus the consulting business.
So 2 more questions, and we'll hand it over to the audience. So Nancy, you mentioned that there was no Facebook when you started, but there was also no Internet of Things, no remote patient monitoring, no compliance software. There weren't even the same types of reimbursement pressures that there are today. So how should we think about opportunities in digital health, healthcare, IT, so that we can be at the forefront?
That's a really good question, because it is moving towards that model. I do a little bit of consulting now, and I'm aware that there are home care companies that have, they monitor their patients in their homes and whatnot, but I see it as both things are still available. The old-fashioned is still going to be necessary. You can't change a patient's dressing through a TV screen. But at the same time, there's many patients that don't need the nurse or the therapist necessarily to come into the home that day. But they do need someone to monitor. They can do their blood pressure from the home, and you can monitor that from back at the office and whatnot. So I think it's going to ease into being, a lot more of the telecommunication in the future. I definitely see that as something that will be going full speed ahead, and from a cost perspective, that's excellent. But I don't see the old-fashioned one-on-one care going away altogether either. There still is very much a need, especially as long as I know that many of the elderly still don't even have computerized, they don't have a laptop, or they don't have the fancy phones and whatnot. So they're still around. So that's still going to be something that we have to care for, but as we go into the future, the technology is definitely going to enter big time.
Great, so last question, then we'll turn it over. Brad, in transitioning out of your current company and spending more time investing, what do you think we should know that you've learned from running these companies, selling these companies, and now making investments?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of benefits of knowing what it feels like to be on the other side. Especially, we primarily bootstrapped everything that we did. Not to say that that's the right thing to do. Definitely creates a little more anxiety. That said, at the end of the day, it works out. I don't know. It's a toss-up. I can say that the next company we start, we'll have fun at. I think. I guess from my side, I can talk about what I look for in companies, and it primarily sort of on the direct investment side. So, and on early stage seed, what I'm looking for is conviction, and I'm looking for focus. I'm looking for an exit strategy. I think that it's great if people want to build a lifestyle company, which I think is the majority of companies that are built, whether they realize it or not. It's hard to give up your baby, but lifestyle companies don't benefit investors. Depending on your agreement, but in most cases they do not. So those are some of the fundamental things that I think I'm looking for. And then also, probably the most fundamental thing is that, especially on early stages, where do my specialties sit? Where can I help this company strategically? And I think there's a lot of companies that actually don't need any help, in which case, like, I'm not the right investor. You know, I think that they're just looking for funds, and honestly, we were probably in that position. You know, we weren't looking for any sort of strategy along with it. But I do think that there's a lot of companies that do need a specific strategy or specific insight, and if you can kind of fill that void, then I think it's a win-win for everybody. You've already been through it. You can bring a lot to the table and fill that pocket at least for when it's needed. So those are probably the primary criteria I'm looking for.
Very good. Any questions from the group? Yes?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Thank you.
Oh, there.
Thank you. My name is Tanvir Gorai. My question is that your company, since it's very successful and you're using Internet of Things and have an impermeable security system, where do you think Jeff Immelt and GE went wrong when they tried to do the same thing with Gusto and wanted to be the Google of Internet of Things?
It's a lot of speculation on my part. GE is an enormous company, and I think they had a lot going right, but I think they tried to boil the ocean. And so we would run into them from time to time, both in competitive situations, but more often in co-opetition scenarios. It's hard for me to speculate on where they went too far this way or that way, but it's an awfully large company that tried to do a lot and be all things to all people versus picking the path. Be my best guess.
Hi Nancy, I'm Quentin Fisher and I run a healthcare analytics company. I'm really trying to use AI to drive operational improvements. And as you built your company, how did you handle some of the trade-offs between the pure clinical maneuvers, regardless of cost, to the balancing, operational efficiencies and driving some strong process within your organization?
That is one of the key things that helped my company become profitable, was being able to maximize efficiencies from the home office, the administrative office location, so that there would be more capital to invest in our clinicians and things to do with quality. So it's extremely important, especially, I don't know if you have multiple locations or just one location, but the more you can make that, which is a bulk of your costs, or who's doing your payroll, who's doing your HR, all of the things that have to take place within an administrative office. If you can make that as efficient as possible, then the money that you will save from those efficiencies can go into the clinical things, the more things that have to do with quality and whatnot. That's one of the key things that we were able to do, which allowed us to put more funding into those things that are important. If you're in a healthcare business, quality has to be absolutely your number one priority. And you're right, it is expensive from a cost perspective for the staff member that you have to pay, to anything, any other equipment or whatnot that you need to provide care. So getting efficient within the administrative piece does free up funding for those. And there's only so much you can do with that $1, right? So the more you can maximize efficiencies with things that don't have to do directly with the patient care, the more money you will have for that piece, for the health care and the care that you're giving your patients. Did that help?
Yeah, I'll follow up afterwards.
Okay. I'd love to help.
Time for one more question? There it is.
I am David Edelman. My company is Thrivable. And my question is it seems there are a lot of talented entrepreneurs trying to build companies in Northeast Ohio. What are some of the current, this is for anyone, gaps in the ecosystem? What are we as a region who wants to invest in startups? Like, what part of the company formation to like Series A process, where are our gaps? And what do we need to do to close them?
I'll take a shot at it. Going through the story of trying to build a company here in Northeast Ohio and grow it, when I was originally starting out and trying to get the footing and the financial wherewithal to grow the company, there just wasn't a lot of venture capital in Northeast Ohio and Cleveland, Ohio. There were a handful of folks that were doing seed money or early stage investments. And so I found myself traveling out to the coast quite a bit to do fundraising activities and find that right fit to help finance the company. But I do believe that organizations like the North Coast Angels are on the right track. And if we can get more activity like North Coast going in Cleveland, Ohio, I think that'll help incubate a lot more of the technology home runs that we're looking for in the community.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think this is absolutely kind of like where everything needs to be right now. But there's definitely still a lot of gaps, but I think the gaps are more, at least from my side, I see more gaps on the talent side. You still see a lot of people going to the West Coast to start these companies, or people that have an acquisition, they're out of Cleveland, and then they go and start their next company on the West Coast. I'd love to see a shift from that. But I think too, hiring in Cleveland's really can be tough on the technical front. So, hiring developers and so forth. Probably 11 or 12 years ago now, I was trying to hire an engineer, and it was like imperative. I found that like 1 in a million engineer, and we were really having a tough time. And we didn't care if they had a college degree. I didn't care if they smelled. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything. I just I was looking for somebody that was like incredibly passionate. And we put all these ads up, and none of them were bringing in any talent. And so I said, well, okay, so we're in Beechwood, Ohio. All right, let's switch that and just say Silicon Valley, Ohio. They won't have a clue where we're located, but they might have an idea of like what kind of people we are. Sure enough, a week later I found the guy. And he didn't have a college degree. And he was incredibly brilliant. And we ended up working together for 10 years. So, I think I'd love to see more talent stay in Cleveland, more talent come to Cleveland. We have so many schools here that are just, releasing this exceptional talent. From my perspective, the biggest gap is keeping them here.
Terrific. Well, really appreciate your time here. And please join me in thanking panel number 1, and we'll welcome up number 2. Well, we're going to dive right in and start the same way we did with the last panel, and just ask everyone to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Dan Cicerci, co-founder of a company called MacroPoint out of Independence. I think we're 2 floors away from Kevin as he built his business.
We have a great building.
We do have a great building, a lot of good exits there. Quick nutshell, MacroPoint is a real-time visibility platform for transportation. So we give our customers, which are typically shippers and brokers, real-time visibility on where their freight is, and then we apply and overlay predictive analytics and maps and other KPIs that allow them to understand where their product is and what decisions then get made based on that information.
Okay, I'm Tony Paparella. Tony Paparella.
Still Tony Paparella. And my name is not Nancy.
Good call.
Good call. So I started a company 20 years ago called Metaquant, M-E-D-I-Q-U-A-T. I've been accused of being sleep deprived and inebriated when I came up with the name, but it had to do with medical technology and quantifying, and actually not so much quantifying, it's more of a nerd back then. And what kind of our claim to fame right now is our data archiving product Data Arc with a K at the end. We store our clients' healthcare data, suck it out of old expensive platforms. The value prop is those old expensive platforms go away, and and a much less expensive platform that we have is utilized to access that data. I started that product sort of before I even knew it was a product by getting a book called Microsoft Access for Dummies, and made a small little app that allowed us, at the time, as with a billing company, to manage patients or patient data from our clients so that we could appropriately bill those accounts. I started the company a few years after that, took that idea and turned it into software. So I was selling DataArc as a product that nobody had ever heard of for a need they didn't know they had in a market that didn't really exist. So it was a little tough at the beginning. And our story is a story of scaling and pivoting at the right time. We had 2 other products that floated us those first 7, 9 years. And then after just kind of tripping along there for about 9 years, we started hitting an average rate of about 40% growth a year over the last 9 or 10 years. So that's where we came from. I sold the vast majority of the company to a company called Silversmith Capital, PE firm, last year. I didn't have angel funding, I didn't have VC funding. I tried the angel route, but people wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole. And they said in a nice way they wouldn't touch me with a 50-foot pole. So, but you know, we struggled along and made it through. So now I'm chairman. I was CEO, I was chairman now. I'm involved in the company, but not on the day-to-day like I used to be. I'm involved in some angel investing. I'm writing a book with my son about bicycling and brewing in Summit County. And I play my guitar and sing songs to my wife and my friends. That's what I do now.
I don't really know how to follow that. I'm Bill Watkins, Managing Director with Harris Williams. That's me 25 years ago, I think. Harris Williams, we are a pure play M&A advisory business. We spend all of our time across the globe helping business owners, whether they're families, institutional funds, family offices, etc., think through, prepare, and really think through, and then execute on a successful M&A transaction. So glad to be here tonight and look forward to the conversation.
Terrific. Well, we'll start with Dan. Did you know exactly where you wanted to take MacroPoint, or were there significant pivots along the way?
We thought we knew. So we started the business and we thought the innovation was going to be creating a ELD device, so an in-cab tracking solution. At the time, Qualcomm was the 800-pound gorilla in that space. Charged a lot of money for these units that were going to be installed. So the aha moment was, we'll build that solution on a consumer-grade mobile phone. And we actually hired, before we had any products, a salesperson, and we did R&D selling. And like Tony, we built the product, but I think we probably only had 200 units at peak out. But quickly through our sales, our R&D selling, we had customers say, well, that's not really that interesting, but if you could give us visibility on the trucks that we don't own, that would be huge. And we quickly pivoted, I guess, into doubling down into that solution and saw the business, and like Kevin, we started and had a consulting company. Looked at the multiples, the opportunity, and saw some of our customers getting the returns that we'd love to have. And so we made this pivot. Bennett Adelson and I invested heavily. We didn't go through a venture round or any angel investing. We just believed in the product, and that was a key decision that we made. And there's probably 10 or 12 other decisions like that over the last 5 or 6 years that were key to the success of the business, but that one kind of stands out to me.
Great. So if I heard you correctly, you sold a product that didn't exist in a market that didn't exist to customers who didn't know they had a problem or needed your product.
That's correct.
And you didn't raise any money. So how did you stay alive long enough to eventually prosper?
I think not only were we drowned, we actually drowned. But what it was, I had 2 other products, and for the first year and a half, we did something called medical coding. because I was born in the medical billing world, and in that you do medical coding, and we segmented that off. Nancy knows about this. We did just the coding part, and that floated for a while. But I reached a decision point. I had to go software or the coding because I couldn't do both. Coding was, like Nancy's market, a very crowded market, very competitive market, and I didn't know it that well, so I stayed with the software. The other product we had, First Comply, kept us going. It just floated. But I mean, you know, we were drowning in debt, and it was scary. But after, and it took a while, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, the corner churned and we started chipping away at that debt. But it was those other 2 products that did it. And the data art product, I was actually a little unsure of at the time. It was a back burner product. And that really didn't hit its tipping point till about, its first tipping point till about 7 years into the company history. So the other 2 products kept us going.
And then, Bill, in the years since that photograph was taken, you've seen hundreds and hundreds of deals. So what should we take away as far as understanding how to invest, how to maximize opportunities, given that you've seen these come full cycle?
Yeah, I can't echo enough. I think we heard from the first panelists around focus. And, you know, we find at times, particularly, and I'm not one of them in the room today, there are you know, many successful entrepreneurs. Again, that's not me. The lemonade stand didn't work and anything else growing up. But what I can tell you is the people that we find drive the best outcome on an exit are just incredibly focused. And they build the teams around that focus, and they don't allow themselves to get out of that lane. And typically those lanes are in inches, not feet, not miles. And that's very hard. That takes a certain individual to do that and build a team that can excel in that environment. But I would say that intense focus, and then the ability to, you know, focus on, is the word focus again, but growth. You know, 10 years ago, everyone wanted to talk about EBITDA. You know, today everyone wants to talk about revenue growth that will exist in 3 years from now. Not necessarily revenue growth that's being driven today, but, you know, show me what you're doing today and tell me how that's really going to evolve in year 3. And we talked a lot about recurring revenue and SaaS. It's fascinating. We're working with, follow me here on this logic, we're working with food companies who are trying to illustrate they're a SaaS business to some extent because they want to just get that pop in multiple. And that's just the investor world we're in today, right? It's about that recurring revenue and the growth that comes along with that.
Excuse me, I need to add on to one point I forgot to say. You brought up perpetual licenses. If you're in the software bit, perpetual, you get all your money up front. SaaS, you get a little bit every year. We like SaaS because that's for recurring, but we couldn't afford SaaS early on, so we were going perpetual license, right? And we just took that cash up front that helped fund us. And there were even years when I would change the pricing so that either SaaS or perpetual license looked more attractive to a client, depending on what our cash flow needs were.
Yeah. So Dan, you did eventually raise a private equity, right? You raised capital, you augmented the team and brought in some other senior leaders of the team. Tell us about that stage.
Sure, I mean, we had a business, you know, growing 100% plus per year, saw huge opportunities, both in kind of wallet growth in the transactions that we were servicing. We saw other features that we thought would be not only valuable to our customers, but an opportunity to charge more money. So we decided we needed a product person that could really own and professionalize the process of eliciting feedback from our customers, documenting the requirements, and then following that all the way through to development. We hired a woman by the name of Chris Beck, who's now the CEO of Proformex. She did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, we got acquired pretty quickly after she joined, so we weren't able to get all of the value. But we decided where do we put our chips? What can Bennett and I do, and where do we augment with great people? And the other person that we brought in, Lou Schneeberger, who I'm sure a lot of folks do know, as our CFO. Because we know, regardless of the exit, it would be a big number, and we needed to make sure we had our financial controls in place. If we did have to go and get more money, those things are super important. And bring some of the reporting and discipline on the finance team. So 2 key hires that we made as part of the follow-on or the initial private equity investment we got.
So Tony, as you grew and saw success in the company, how did you balance trying to increase the likelihood of success with increasing the magnitude of success? Were there specific trade-offs that you saw and had to choose between because you did not have investment capital?
Yeah, I would say, I always saw those two things as linked. Like if we did something that made the likelihood of our product being better, I felt that we'd have greater magnitude, we'd have more market opportunity. There are some trade-offs. There are the clients that say, I need you to build this widget for me. But we know it's a one-off and it's goofy, and I know they're the only ones in the world that are gonna like it. So in those cases, we might charge them, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I don't want that. So that's part of how we balance those two things, I would say. Probably my best answer.
I think just to add on to the, and Tony, it sounds like you did this too, we adjusted our pricing model so our Series A investors were really our customers, right? And we had prepayment of funds for our SaaS business, and then we'd have cash faster. We'd redeploy all that cash to grow, and really alleviated 2 things. One, investors, and then secondly, a collections department. We had, ultimately 5,000 customers ranging from giving us $200 to $1 million. We didn't want to have to go and collect on that. And so operationally, we made decisions very early on to streamline that and avoid early needs for capital.
Yeah, we were development, I won't say development heavy. We pioneered this space. It was us and one other company that was in it early on. And our market, we're at the top of that market now still. But a lot of development time, we chased a lot of things and kept adding that on to the product. There were some dead ends. There were a couple things we did that was, all right, so in retrospect, maybe that wasn't a great idea. It didn't hurt us in the marketplace. Maybe what helped us is that we were more willing and flexible to do what our clients really needed and really wanted. And that's something I really enjoyed, was seeing that product grow and address more and more needs in the marketplace for that niche that we were in.
Dan, just to go back to your last comment, so you basically had loans from your customers because they paid you in advance. And that's something that a lot of companies seek to do, and many of them are told to take a hike, right? No, this is often feedback you can get. What was it about either the trust you developed, the quality of the product, the team, the relationship that allowed you to pull it off?
Well, I think, honestly, it was the confidence that we had when we delivered the expectation. And as we evolved the business, we started from really asking for very low amounts of money, and the nervousness of the sales team about, well, they couldn't commit to that. It's 6 months is a long time, to fast forward 5 years, it's a 3-year contract minimum. And the only reason we got there was, some of it became reputation and feature function, but I would say 70% of the reason was the confidence of the salesperson and the maturity of the sales process to get the customers over the hump from that concern.
Great. And so, Bill, can you talk to the importance of getting the financings, right? So that was the last item in that cycle. Something that's easy for some companies and something that's hard for a lot of other companies. What's your take on getting financings right?
So, when you look at the financing world, I would say today, and you all know this, the venture debt world is probably as strong as it's ever been with capital flowing into it. There are a number of funds that are looking to put billions of dollars of capital to work. The challenge is navigating your way there, because these funds are seeing thousands of opportunities, if not maybe hundreds of thousands, depending on the size of these funds. I would tell you that, and we may get to this a little bit later, having a very strong board that has access, that can help maybe open some doors to those capital providers is incredibly helpful as you're building your business. What we have found, and it's kind of interesting, I don't know if our sample set is market or not, but many of the entrepreneurs we work with have taken the route of, I'm going to say bootstrapping or friends and family, more so than this group of angel investors. And part of it, when we ask folks, is more along the lines of, I don't know if it's a confidence issue, but it's more around, hey, I'm chest beating here, this is my idea and my business. I think I can get this to the Series A round where I'm actually bringing in a more traditional venture investor. So there is that gap. And part of that gap is emotional and psychological, like I just talked about. And the other part of the gap is, probably 5 years ago, the venture debt world wasn't where it is today. I think those bridges are being built, but I do think you need to find a navigator to help you through that system.
Tony, after going it alone so long, how did you know it was the right time to bring in a private equity partner and eventually step away?
Throughout the history of the company, I ran the company. You know how it is early on. Some of you, you're a one-man band, you're doing everything. We'd hire people, right? And I would say I've done every job in the company, but whoever's doing that job now is doing a hell of a lot better job at it than when I was doing it. So we just kept hiring people, replacing what I did. And I got to the point where I replaced almost everything except being CEO. And I knew I had reached the point of scaling. I wasn't confident in myself being able to scale that company past where we were, maybe a little bit farther. And I thought, I probably could, but I'm going to just be at it 80 hours a week to do that. And I wasn't in for that ride. So we looked for people who were a lot smarter at that sort of thing, promoted the fellow I hired as a COO. And he promoted to CEO, and he's doing a fantastic job. And I'm still involved with the company, and I still love the company. I love the people. I love what we do. And unlike Nancy, I didn't step completely away. I'm probably in the first phase you were, right? You're still involved, but I'm not there day to day. But I think part of it was that I knew how far I could go, and I knew how far the company could go under the right situation.
2 more questions, and we'll turn it over. One of the questions earlier was about gaps in the region. And Dan, from your perspective, what do you think we need to see or do to make the next 3 or 5 macro points?
I would say, I think, regional investment confidence around a SaaS business model. When we did our raise, we had about 15 companies that bid on the investment. One was from Cleveland. The rest flew in. It was exciting to see people that, look at Cleveland as kind of a flyover place. They're coming from the coast. So I think confidence in SaaS and certainly network-based SaaS businesses, there's a ton of scale and opportunity, margin, and the exits are significant. So the North Coast Venture Fund, I think what you guys are doing is the start to that. We see Case Western Reserve kids. We couldn't hire enough of them. So having more businesses that are exciting enough to keep them here would be key as well. Yeah, those are probably 2 big things that I would pick at.
So, Bill, as many of us in the room have discovered over the years, it's a lot easier to get into a deal than it is to get out of it. What should we know or think about exits and exit strategies?
So I touched on earlier the sale preparation, and you really need to go into the start of the business thinking about how you will exit the business. And, as strange as it sounds, because I know capital is so important, but if you can task someone in the organization to be, the SEO or the strategic exit officer, that can be the person that is challenging everything you're doing day in and day out of how will this help us maximize the exit, that's incredibly important. And doing the prep along the way of, not to get too in the weeds, but, making sure you have a PDF or a cloud system in place for all the documents within the business. You'd be surprised. I mean, I had a deal, of all things, get delayed for 4 business days because the Penn State football tickets were in the name of the company. And we were selling the stock of the company. So what was going to happen to the Penn State football tickets, right? These are little things that can get in the way of a successful transaction. But if you have one point person really early on helping think about the exit, that goes a long way to help you maximize the dollars.
Just to add to the CEO and business owners in the room, I think as I'm doing a little work with some of the venture companies, what I would say is be very clear on the value prop, understand the TAM, the 3 supporting kind of differentiators of your value prop, and then as soon as that proves out, lean in heavy on sales and marketing. I think as sometimes product people, we're so excited about the next feature, function. The way we built the business, honestly, we some would say way over invested in sales and marketing, but in a network-based SaaS business, it's about speed to market. So don't get too excited about the magical feature that's going to make the business way better, as much about what's the message, who are we getting it out to, and then how are we going to execute on our marketing message across a broad medium, and then how are we going to train our sales organization to really process, sell the message and win. So.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
I was just gonna say that what Dan said is huge, is you gotta pick the right time when you're gonna make that investment to get that product out there, because if it's viable and people are loving it, if you're not doing it, somebody else is, and you're gonna lose that market.
Yeah, so what I was just a last point, I said earlier about focus, and this may be counterintuitive, but I would also tell you to go out and spend time talking to your competitors. I'm not saying, deliver the IP sheet and how everything works, but go out and talk to your competitors, talk to investors, VC investors, private equity investors that are in your industry that like what you're doing. Ask them about their thesis, ask them what they're thinking about, ask them what their limited partners are telling them is happening in the world today, right? Just stay very focused on what you're doing, but be very open to what else is happening in the ecosystem, because that may help you, take a left when you're thinking about veering to the right a little bit in terms of strategy.
Questions from the group?
Thank you. Dan, or everyone else as well, if you could just comment, you mentioned about the value of sales and marketing. If you could comment, since I'm in marketing and run my own licensing and new technologies firm, loading up this question, how, or share with us the mindset of you're in a position of, you've been in business for several years, and you look around, you have an impressive array of engineers, designers, a lot of production people. However, you turn to us, or maybe we've pitched to you, what are the hot buttons, or what are the elements that are going to be most appealing that I'm going to be presenting, where you just get it that we really are of value to marketing and pitching your IP to partners and or like-minded manufacturers?
Sure, we did start with some agencies to kick off some of our marketing. I think the biggest gap that we saw when we were working with outside agencies is they couldn't or were unwilling to connect the sales or the marketing spend to sales results. And at the end of the day, we were willing to spend a ton of money, but I needed to see the connection. And so until we brought it in-house and put the right systems in place to really see from initial drip to signed contract. Wasn't perfect, but we could connect the dots enough. We really kind of quadrupled down in our marketing. So I think the direct response is connect it to the results. And if it's, spend to lead, spend to sales qualified leads, spend to result, the closer you can get to contract, the better. And the more dollars that are available ultimately to continue to spend.
If, that's perfect, that's perfect. The one thing I would add is does the firm understand who we are and what we're trying to sell? Because ours is, it's a weird product, and I was in the industry selling it, and it was a weird product to them. And I had marketing firms that even after a year, were still getting it wrong. They would couch what we did in a certain way, and I said, no, that is not what we do. So it sounds simple, but sometimes it's not so simple, making sure you understand the message that we need to get across.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan and Tony. Could you describe the process you undertook in selling your companies and what you did through that process to maximize your returns?
Yeah, so for our process, we saw growth, we looked at risk reward, we heard the multiples out there, and certainly, like I think another panelist said, you start to get a lot of calls from people that want to invest in your business. We ultimately hired a banker, specifically focused in transportation technology. We ran a process, like I said, had 15 or so companies in, and the last two were a private equity partner and a strategic. We went with the private equity partner because we were still having fun and wanted to keep rolling, and ultimately the strategic didn't go away, and 366 days later, they bought the business.
So similar, I would say 2 years, 2-3 years before we sold, we had the words healthcare and tech in the same sentence. So we were getting calls all the time. We'd go to HIMSS every year. People didn't know us. Hey, we're really interested in you. I said, great, what do we do? Pause, So I fielded those calls for a while, and eventually I was talking to my brother, Mike Paparella, of Signet, investment banker, little plug. He actually ended up running our process, but well before that, I talked to a couple of companies at HIMSS. I talked to a few companies, a few PE firms. We wanted the PE route because I still wanted to have involvement in the company, and I was looking for that second bite of the apple. So that's the route that was in my mind that whole time. And then once we had a good, really good 2017, and 2018 was looking even better. The market was right, and we thought, okay, now's the time to go. We did I'm going to call it a mini process. So instead of handing out a book to 100, 200 PE firms, it was we've kind of figured out the profile of what we wanted and went after a few of those firms, a couple that Mike knew and a couple that had called me. And we winnowed it down to about 5 and then went through the process from there. And I liked that better. I don't think I would have liked spending all my time for 6 months going through a much longer process. But that's what we did.
So I just have to add on to this, 2 incredible outcomes, and Harris Williams was involved in neither, but what I wanted to bring up was, right now, as we speak, it's a very interesting M&A market. I think you all know there are trillions of dollars of cash, but what's happened over the course of the last 3 or 4 years is our great businesses have been sold. Great investment bankers have been helping that process, and the market has gotten to the point where to digest a 15 to 20 times EBITDA multiple. We sold a service cleaning business for 22 times EBITDA. So that is, those multiples today, right, which is fantastic. But what's happening is the investors today are kind of sitting back and saying, man, if this business is not squarely in my thesis, I'm not going to look at it. So by going, it's interesting because this is real time for our company today. By running these more focused processes, we're actually falling into situations where we're not getting anybody at the finish line. Because people are self-selecting out because they think the asset is too great, they can't see a way to get to that multiple. So the pendulum's starting to swing back a little bit more, where we may not call it 200, but we may be perhaps broadening the net a little bit to make sure at the end we still have, some maneuvering to do to get to that stronger price.
I think, Tony, maybe like you, we were running a profitable business. So the feedback we got in the PE market was actually super positive of being a Midwest company. They're like, oh wow, you guys are like a Midwest grassroots, like trying to be profitable, honest, straightforward. And so I think it did actually lend even more credibility to the success that we were having. And it gave us the ability to take our time. We weren't burning through cash where we had to get an investor today, tomorrow, whatever. So we're able to pick ultimately the right partner. And I think that would be a good key point of feedback is, regardless of what you do, run a profitable business. Because in certain markets we've seen companies get bought up as they're burning through cash, but sobriety eventually comes through, and I think it's the safest place to be, profitable.
So, Dan, you bring up an interesting point. Oh, Mike Hammer. We've seen WeWork, what's happened with them. We've seen Uber, and they just hit their lockout, the end of the lockout period. What's the impact of really high valuations on the private side when ultimately a lot of these companies, even if they're acquired by private equity, whatever, the eventual goal is bring it public because that's a good exit strategy for liquidity, right? For the company, the shareholders, and whatnot. So what's the impact of these really high valuations? And let's not forget Sun's vision fund that they just took, right?
I think the short-term impact is good companies don't get funding they need to be successful. They get kind of looped in. I think I even heard Uber say we're not WeWork over the last day or two. So the time, effort, energy to say we're not a certain thing, I think does hurt. I think ultimately too, it sets the wrong expectations for employees that are in certain exit pools when they are certainly very quickly underwater post events like you saw with WeWork. So I think ultimately it's not good for the market, but it's the reality of capitalism, and it will continue in perpetuity.
Question up front?
Yeah. Avni Doshi. And my question is to all of you, is as you went through the exit process, what was your oh crap moment where you kind of realized, if I had known this, what to do or not to do somewhere X months and years ahead of time, I could have been in a better spot today? And it could have to do with the company, it could have to do with the process, any aspect of it, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I got feedback, Ben and I both got feedback that talking to your potential acquirers years before you're looking to sell, we wish we would have done that, because we were thinking of it more as a cash business and how much cash we need to keep to bring in to pay for all the things we're doing. Our acquirers are thinking, much more about earned revenue and things like that. So I would have talked to the acquirers earlier on to understand what those KPIs are. And then, Kevin and I were talking about this coming out of a consulting business. I don't think I would have ran a consulting business for as long as I realized how tough that is compared to running a SaaS business? That's my quick feedback.
I was pretty comfortable with where we were and how things transpired for us. We had been talking to people off and on for a while. I'd like to say I was smart enough to bring in an advisor several years before that, somebody whose shoulder I could cry on and who could smack me upside the head and say, don't do that. And I felt good about what we had done. We had been running the balance between perpetual license and SaaS for a while, and it was working out for us. In retrospect, had we had more SaaS, maybe that would have been better. But otherwise, I felt very balanced and in a good spot at that time.
I would just say, having yin to your yang. So, again, I said focus earlier, but at times, if you're so myopic, you need to have somebody on your team that's willing to raise their hand and say, hey, have we thought about this? What are the unintended consequences, et cetera? That's a big part, just to challenge yourself day in, day out.
We had actually had an offer that we didn't think was great, and we backed off from it. It was during a year where we were retooling, so we were putting a lot of money back into the company, but that didn't look great. It looked pretty flat that particular year. But out of that year, we came out like a lion because we were able to invest back into our processes so that we could scale, and it really paid off for us a few years later. So we were held back by that year. I'm glad we held back because the payoff was a lot better. Let's say we had not made that investment and we took the EBITDA. Whatever we got that year paled in comparison to what we got just 2 years later.
Excellent. Well, please join me in thanking all of our panelists for a great conversation. We'll ask you to stay up here for one moment and just help us out with the last matter of the night, which is the Angel's Envy. As a reward to those who have stuck around, we have a system. Okay, so we had 94 RSVPs here tonight. And what we're going to do is ask you, Dan, to tell us which of those 94 should walk away with the Angel's Envy.
Can you just give you a number?
Number between 1 and 94.
20.
Number 20. All right. And we will ask you, Tony, to read number 20.
Tony Pepperell.
I should have known better than that.
Nikki DiFilippo. All right, Nikki. Party at Nikki's house.
Well, thank you very much, Nikki. Enjoy the bottle. And we hope we will see everyone here on December 4th, Tinkerville, for the last session of the year. Thanks again to our panelists. Thanks again to PNC, and have a good night.